Today we will take this wages and salary management, the first topic of your next unit. We will try to cover up the basic concepts of wages a bit in detail, and this particular topic may require maybe that 2 lectures or 3 lectures to cover in depth. So, what we look at it when we talk about that wages and salary management. So, it talks about on one part wages and on other part salary. Most of the people might be having a very common understanding about wages and salary as similar. Some of the people may be having understanding as wages are a bit different than salary. In layman, we can understand that wages are basically the amount which is paid to blue collar people, employees, and salary is paid to white collar. So you can understand the nature of the job, or in another way you can say, for employees it is wages, for officials or management or executives it is salary. So my main lecture would be focused on wages, emergence of the wage concept, the wage understanding, types of wages, and the wage fixation methods. So when we talk about this become very important to go in ancient period, and you will find that there was a kind of payment of in terms of kind when labor was working in farms or in agriculture land. So labor was paid in terms of in kinds. Maybe that you work for 8 hours, you will be paid 5 kg of wheat or 5 kg of rice or something like that. Before independence, if you talk about these things, you will find that the first half of your century, 1900 to 1950, there had been a very human cries about the wages, or especially the payment in kinds, and not at par or equal to the labor performed by the laborers or employees. So we will also discuss about the various historical movements. Let us look at some of the definitions. The first definition, laissez-faire policy, explains that wage is the price paid to the worker for the services he has sold to the employer. Now this is very clear cut definition that whatever services you have sold to employer, you are paid for that. It is a compensation paid to worker in return for the contribution he makes for the achievement of the corporate objectives. This was given by commodity theory of labor. Now if we talk about these two, you will find that it simply says that wages are the wage is basically a amount paid to the worker for the services. Now I feel that it is not the exactly same which you talk that if I work for this quantum of job and you are paying this, so it is not basically a price paid, it is basically a compensation, the compensation that a man or woman contributes to the company or to the organization or to the society, and it is always less what company, organization or society gets. If we talk about the types of wages, before moving to this types of wages, let us take about the salary. Now, on the other hand, you will see that salary is the compensation to an employee for personal services rendered on weekly, monthly, or annual basis. Now, usually we talk about wages, and a layman concept says that wages are daily basis, daily wages, and salary is weekly, monthly, or annual basis. And that is why it is usually associated with office employees, supervisors, managers, or professionals. Whereas you don't look at that wages are basically, it may be wages can also be weekly, but it is, wages are calculated on daily basis. Usually you look at the daily wages, daily wage employee. In outsourcing, you will find the daily wage employee in government or organization sector. So they are calculated their remuneration, compensation. The price is calculated based on per day, or we talk about per diem in international definition. So if you look at the types of wages, let us look at this concept. There are three types of wages which are very common: minimum wage, fair wage, and living wage. Now, minimum wage, you can understand during our independence. Before that, you are not having any policy related to the payment. Yes, the Payment of Wages Act 1936 was there, but that was focusing on the payment of wages. Now, how much payment of wages? That was incorporated in Minimum Wages Act 1948. And the principle which was promoted or propagated was that minimum wage should provide not only the bare sustenance of the life, but also for the preservation of the efficiency of worker. Point is that it is not that you work for 8 hours and you get that amount which helps you to eat food, to live, but also to preserve that efficiency which you maintain on regular basis. Maybe that you must be medically fit, you must have all other amenities. So at the time of Minimum Wage Act, it was really a landmark. However, you can understand that the government's first pay commission or second pay commission did not respect these things, especially in government sector. Second type of living wage, as the Fair Wage Committee in 1948 profounded, that a living wage should enable an earner to provide for himself and his family not only the bare 29 essentials of food, clothing, shelters. And this is a typing error. It is not 29, rather bare essential of food, clothing, and shelter, but a measure of frugal comfort, including education for his children, protection against ill health, requirement of essential social needs, and a measure of insurance against the more important misfortunes, including old age or medical or other issues. So living wage means to live a good life, whatever is required, that has to be, you know, managed within the living wage. So you can say that living wage are the more than minimum wage. And the Fair Wage Committee also define fair wages as which is above the minimum wages but below the living wages, means fair. And the fair wages should depend on the consideration of such factors as the recommended by the Fair Wage Committee in 1948. The productivity of the labor, whatever performance of the labor. Now this is important to understand. First point is productivity of the labor. Second, prevailing rates of the means in the same or neighboring locality. Third, the level of national income and its distribution. And fourth is the place of industry in the economy of the country. Now these four factors must be included in deciding about the fair wages. Now you must understand that whenever you are going to have the fair wages are usually not very much talked about. Industry mainly talked about the minimum wages, because the minimum wage, there was a legislation which forced industries to follow. The Payment of Wages Act forced industries to follow legally. But Fair Wage Committee recommendations were neither very much respected by the government itself in their pay commission, first or second, nor by the industry in detail what we talk about. However, when we look at the factories, factories have followed to some extent or to great extent these formulas. Altogether, you can understand that there in software industry, you will find that there are companies which are paying living wage or above than that. There are companies which are believing in fair wages, and in some of the sector, I cannot say in that IT sector, but I can say in other sectors they are giving minimum wages also. Say for example, what we talk about government outsourcing. Nowadays the government is outsourcing most of the class 3 and class 4 jobs. What they are doing, their main payment is based on the minimum wages which government decides. Say for example, if they say that minimum wages are somewhat 400 rupees per day, so you look at that a person who will be working in class 4 would be getting somewhere 11,000 or 12,000 per month based on this calculation. Or government also decides about this formula, but they work on minimum wages, whereas the regular employee who get a government job as a class 4 gets living wages, not the minimum wages. And this difference between the minimum wages and living wages, this amount is huge. Say for example, a normal class 4 employee would get somewhat 25,000 to 35,000 at entry stage in government job at present. But an outsourcing person in class 4 will get somewhat 10,000 approximately per month. So it will be minimum wages and the living wages, their living wages are almost 3 times the fair wages. Minimum wages are not including any dearness allowance or travel allowance or any other incentive or bonus or anything. But living wages includes these things. So the basic document of defining this wages and uh, you can look at the reference of these wage policy or wage reforms. There was a Indian Labor Conference in July 1957, and that Indian Labor Conference recommended some of the fundamental principles in deciding about the wages, especially fair wages. The first recommendation was that standard working class family should be taken to consist of three consumption units for the earner. The earning of the women, children, and adolescents should be disregarded. That means you consider that one earner is having a family of three members, consumption units, to decide about the wages of that particular person. The minimum food requirement should be calculated on the basis of net intake of 2700 calories as recommended by that time Dr. Aykroyd for an average Indian adult of a moderate activity. So this much food is required. The first point says that 3%. Third point says that clothing required should be estimated at per capita consumption of 18 yards per annum, which would mean that for an average worker's family of 4, a total of 72 yards. In respect of the housing, the norms should be the minimum rent charge, sorry, it is not change, charged by the government in any area for houses provided under the subsidized housing scheme for low income group. That means it talks about number of family, talked about per person calories food requirement, per person clothing requirement, and per person housing requirement. Fuel, lighting, and other miscellaneous items of the expenditure should constitute 20% of the total minimum wages. So this is the bare minimum base of any wage definition or wage decision, and this was a document, base document of 1957, and the fuel, lighting, and other miscellaneous item of the expenditure should constitute 20% of the total minimum wages. Now, this Indian Labor Conference 1957, which was having participation of so many government people also, government officers also, ministers, as well as the industries, labor unions, they agreed upon these minimum formula to decide about minimum wages. But when government itself formulated the first pay commission and second pay commission for their government employees, government did not accept these recommendations, especially for housing, for food, and for this 20% miscellaneous 20%. However, government tried to justify these minimum wage fundamentals in third pay commission. So what we talk about, that these fundamentals, which were basically based of defining the Indian wage, Indian wages, especially for laborers. These wages were very important, Altogether, constitutional payment of wage act 1936 was in place. Minimum wage act 1948 was in place. So in spite of all these two, this labor conference recommended the basic fundamental guidelines to calculate these things. Now if you talk about, we have discussed the salary, and now we need to look at that what are the factors which are influencing wages and salary administration in general. Look at the first factor is ability to pay. So it is irrespective of other factors. The payment of wages, the wages are defined by ability to pay. Say for example, same engineer works in TCS, and same engineer when works in Microsoft, or say for example any other company. So the wage difference, salary difference, that depends the ability of the company organization to pay. If and how this ability to pay is in high or low, it depends on the profitability, or it depends on the revenue, it depends on the business, the nature of business. The supply and demand of the labor in the current market is again the important factor. Say for example, what happens if you need 10 laborers and there are only 8 laborers available? So obviously it will be demand driven economy, and demand will drive the wage policy. They will say that we will charge this much and you have to pay because you don't have any choice. And if supply is more, say for example, imagine 20 years back when engineering was a dream career. So engineers were considered as a very lucrative profession, engineering. Even you can remember the engineers in your society. If someone was asking that which one is the house of engineers have, so everybody was knowing that one. But nowadays what is happening? Supply is increased. So now every next house may be having one engineer, because supply is increased. So wages and salary of the engineering segment. Nowadays you can look at the medical line. After 10 years it may be that medical line may not be so much lucrative. Maybe that so many private medical colleges come up with within the range of middle class, and every next person says that will go for medical profession. The prevailing market rate is again a very important factor which affect in wages and salary administration. Prevailing market rate. You are in India, so engineers prevailing market rate is this. You go to US, your prevailing market rate is different. Say for example, we talk about that Bilaspuri labor. So Bilaspuri labor means when they work in Bilaspur itself, they get hardly 100 rupees or 200 rupees per day. But when come in Kanpur, they get 500 rupees per day. When they go to Delhi, they get some 1,000 rupees per day. So the market rate very much regulates the wages and salary. The cost of living is very important. When we talk about that Bilaspur or Kanpur or Delhi, the factor of cost of living, because they can survive in 200 per day in Bilaspur, but they cannot survive in Delhi. in 200 rupees per day earning. So cost of living is also forcing, you know, employer to pay more depending. Then it comes about living wages. What is the living wage policy or living wages in the particular area or particular sector or particular industry or particular, country? Then the company's productivity is also one of the factor which is crucial. If company's productivity is high, profit margin is high, the revenue and the profit ratio is, good, then wages would be high or salary. So for example, Microsoft pay you so much, on high side because their productivity is good. They have a good market. They earned good return or revenue, so they pay you. Now these six are basically, you can say, independent factors or dependent on some natural phenomena. Seventh is a trade union's bargaining power. Sometime your trade union is so strong that they bargain with the management and get their salary increased. So this is also one of the factors. They say, look at, I give you example of today's scenario. Every after 3 months or 6 months, you see that the banking employees, they go on strike. Bank is employee unions and officers union. They go on 1 day strike, and the bank understand that, look at this 1 day loss is so much loss that they sit on the table and then they adjust that will increase this much or this benefit or this fringe benefit or incentive. So it is only because of that trade union, driven sector, I say. Job requirements. Sometimes your job requires specialized or hazardous processes or dangerous, processes, or job requires special skills. The special skills means if you enter into coding, everybody cannot enter into that job. So that job requires specific skills which determines the wages and salary. And obviously psychological and sociological factors are always there. Sometimes people, when we talk about that, loyalty must be rewarded, and loyalty is something which is psychological or sociological. And if loyalty is rewarded, means somewhere it has impact on wage or salary or compensation. So it becomes very important to understand that these factors in deciding wages and salary administration. We will continue this particular session, wages and salary administration, in coming lectures. So